Hi, Assalamualaikum. I am Dr. Hasnida Che Md Ghazali from UPSI, Tanjung Malim, Perak. First of all, I would like to thank you for the 6th International Conference on Education, Business, Islamic and Technology 2021 for inviting me to be the keynote speaker for this conference. My talk for today is on assessment in the time of pandemic. Okay, at the peak of COVID-19 pandemic, UNESCO estimates that there are 91.3% of the world students were learning remotely and more than 1.3 billion students learning online. So that is the statistics currently. Then the Ministry of Education all this while has taken some initial initiatives to distribute professional circular, release letters, notification letters and guidelines, and also providing PDPR manual to the teachers concerning the new assessment system for our Malaysian education system. And we can see that these initiatives do coincide with the PPM 2013 to 2025, our Malaysian education plan, whereby every student needs to have access to education to achieve the potential. But currently, the national education system needs to create a new mechanism in assessment method when schools and universities are forced to close when the third wave of the COVID-19 pandemic hits the country. So teachers have to explore and plan a new method, especially the alternative method, be it formatively or summatively, the alternative assessment method, to replace the written test, the face-to-face. So as we know that if the teachers plan the alternative assessment to be formative, that is of course to ensure that the students' learning could be improved through constructive feedback. But if it is summative, it's only to grade the students and also to label them, to look at their performance, and also if summative assessment also can be used as for the school's performance also. Okay, looking at alternative assessment, what is actually alternative assessment? By definition, alternative assessment is an authentic form of assessment that measures proficiency in relation to knowledge application rather than recitation. So all this while, or traditionally, we can see that our assessment is focusing more on recitation. So we want now, as also together with the pandemic, we want to shift into focusing more on knowledge application by using alternative assessment. Another definition for alternative assessment, it is a form of assessment which are designed to understand what a student can do rather than what he knows. So it is a form of assessment that, for example, we can do projects or what else? The presentation, students' presentation, for example, so that we can assess on what they know we can assess on what they are able to do rather than what students know. Okay, next is types of alternative assessment. Before I continue my talk, I would like to give you some examples of alternative assessment so that you have an idea about it. We can have project-based assignment, problem-based assignment, presentations, reports, interviews, role play, dancing, performance assessment, reflective journal, concept maps, critical analysis, case-based scenarios, portfolios, peer feedback, or self-assessment. And there are lots of alternative assessment out there. This is just a few of them. Okay, next is to look at the generic elements of alternative assessment. First is you have to aware that alternative assessment is performance based. So students can be assessed through projects, exhibition, role play, drama. As long as they are performing something, then you have a rubric to assess that. Second is it has to be authentic, where it connect to community, to connect to real world. As you know that when we talk about OBE, outcome based education, that is also where we are interested to educate our students to have something authentic or real, connecting to real life. The third elements of alternative assessment is portfolio. We can also ask students to collect sample work of them and then do the reflection. So if students are able to reflect their work, meaning that they are performing, they could perform, and you can improve that from time to time. The fourth is the writing samples, such as newsletter, ask them to do bulletins, journal, learning blogs, and report proposal, for example. And the fifth element is the open-ended. We have to be aware that alternative assessment have to be an open-ended scheme of thing, no fixed answer, and it requires multiple solutions. So you have to analyze the answer, you have to look at the student's answer. After you have assessed that, you have to have a rubric, and it has to be an open, that meaning that there's no one fixed answer. Students can approach from different strategies or techniques, as long as you understand what they're doing and what they're focusing on, what their problem is. And the last one is alternative assessment can be either self or peer assessment. You as an educationist, you have to educate learners to become independent and responsible and trustworthy. And there are a few techniques actually where educationists can do to improve their self-assessment or peer assessment of students, such as for example, for peer assessment, there are a few practical techniques like see three before me, where you ask the students to see three students, ask them to improve their work before they come and see the teachers. Or peer evaluation of homework, where they ask their friends to assess their work, and then after that give them marks. And also when the students submit the assignment to you, you also give marks to them and also to the peers. Or homework help board, IUV checklist, or by and also for self-assessment, there are a few practical techniques such as traffic lights, colored cups, learning portfolios, and many more. Okay, before I continue with the steps in doing alternative assessment, there are one important issues here. During the pandemic, the lecturers or the educationists have to understand the students and have to get to know your students in detail. It is a necessary steps for all teachers in setting up a safe and caring environment, whether be it a face-to-face or virtual. Why? Because this is important. Because you are setting an alternative assessment, and if you don't know your students or the students' background, it is most probable to have the implementation of the alternative assessment will not be that effective, I believe. So first is to ask yourself that where are your students are they in Malaysia or abroad, what they're going through, do they have access to internet, handphones, computer, laptop, and all that, and what they are going through. Are they in a stress situation, or do they have any events, any scenario which is not which it does not allow them to be in a proper place to study. do they have like heavy raindrops or whatever. So can also and also you have to be aware that can your students be contacted if they cannot assess you in a way. So what other ways can you assess them? Let's say you can post to them the thumb drive, or they could post the answer back to you, or other than using phones or laptops, or you can also use postage, right? And also have a look at the psychological well-being. Are they under control? Can they handle situation? And other than that is, do they have sufficient time? Do you have sufficient time to deliver and to assess? Because you are given only 14 weeks of teaching, so you have to set up your assessment tools and also timing. And you also have to know your students' prior knowledge so that it will be easier for you to teach and also to assess. And also plus being a better educator for them. You as an educationist, as a teachers, you have to make sure that your well-being is okay, so that the teaching process and also the assessing process is good and in control. Okay, next is to look at the steps in doing alternative assessment. If we look at, there are 6 main steps when we were to do alternative assessment. First is to look at the learning outcome of your syllabus. So in every universities, I think there will be given course structure with the learning outcomes, or you yourself create your own learning outcomes for that particular syllabus. So the first off is you have to identify what are your learning outcomes, be it and also have a look at the soft skills, whether it's cognitive, physical, or affective domain. Second is, after you have identified the learning outcomes, think of the interesting ways to assess. Teachers or educationists are encouraged to be creative from time to time, but creative in adopting new tools to assess, but be sure that it tally with the learning outcomes. Because we as a lecturer, we want to make sure that our teaching follows the what we call that constructive alignment, whereby we align our learning outcome and align with the teaching and learning strategies, and also align with the assessment. If it's not aligned, then you cannot have a very good teaching and learning process to achieve the intended learning outcome. Okay, the third steps, when you are thinking about doing alternative assessment, you also have to think of the most disadvantaged students. Make sure, in all fairness, the assessment is also catered to the most disadvantaged situation or the disadvantaged students. If your alternative assessment type of alternative assessment is not does not cater to the disadvantaged students, meaning that group of students, it's not fair to that particular group of students. Okay, the fourth steps is the instructional process. When you do alternative assessment, when you choose the tools for alternative assessment, think of the teaching strategies that you would choose. Which teaching and learning strategies, teaching pedagogy, teaching technique that you would choose, which is aligned to the assessment tools that you choose. So think of the constructive alignment also. Don't be like short sendiri when you are choosing what assessment tools to be used. The fifth is to begin with the end in mind. So you decide on the appropriate measuring tool based on the nature of the assessment. And last is to have a look at the reliability and the validity of the instrument. Is your assessment tools valid and reliable, so that you can use it in implement with the students? Okay. Last is have a look. We are going to look into how to plan for successful alternative assessment. And after that, I will end up with what are the barriers in implementing alternative assessment. Okay, when we were to plan for successful alternative assessment, I suggest that you divide your lesson in a modular form based on your CLO, or your course learning outcome. So you have this table where the first column is to write down your CLO, or your course learning outcome, and the second column is for the topics. So you your CLO, okay, let's say you have 5 CLO, and it has to tally with your teaching, let's say 14 weeks. So you know which CLO is for the first 2 or 3 weeks, followed by the following weeks, and total up will be 14 weeks altogether. So let's say you have your first CLO is for the students to be able to explain something. Okay, so if you want the students to be able to explain something, and you plan it to be, you're going to cover that in 2 weeks time, for example. So from there, you plan for the tools and creative activities involved. For example, you can use Kahoot, quiz, Mentimeter, quiz via Moodle, because from these tools, there is a chance for the students to explain that to you, because for the question issues that you raise in that, then the students are able to explain to you. Or okay, another example, if your course learning outcome is to analyze, for example, so you plan, okay, I will do this topics, there will be 4 topics involved in 3 weeks time, for example. So you plan that, which week, which topic, and then from there, because you want your students to be able to analyze, right? So you can give tools and activities, for example, a movie, ask them to watch a documentary, and then ask them to analyze the movie. Or you can ask them to analyze any projects, okay, for example, and you can apply to any CLO from your course. Okay, apart from that, when you plan for your table for your alternative assessment, make sure that, okay, just now I told you you have to plan for the CLO, for the week, for the topic, and the other thing is you also have to plan whether it will be a formative assessment or summative assessment, because normally, yes, I think most of us are aware that formative assessment is a form of assessment which is very much contributed to increasing students' performance. But all this while, we realize that teachers are giving feedback to improve them, but they didn't give marks for that. At the end of it, when you do summative assessment by giving them quiz or checklist, give assignment or forum. So at the end of it, you check and then you give marks. That is called summative assessment. let's say you give them project, portfolio, case study. So the end project, you give mark, and it is called summative assessment. So both of them contribute a lot to our students' performance, as long as you decide which component is for formative assessment, and then which component will be summative assessment. And then from your all of his course learning outcome, you decide how many learning outcome you have for the whole semester, for 14-week study. And from there, because you have hours and topics involved, so you try to give percent for your assessment according to your hours of teaching and learning. So let's say you have weightage for the first for project is 20%, for forum you have 10%, and so on and so on, which is add up all together will be 100%. So normally the weightage of your assessment will be depending on how much time you use for each course learning outcome. Okay, let's say because you have 14 weeks, and if it's 3 credit, then it will be 14 times 3, it is 42 hours. If you have 5 hours to complete the first course learning outcome, then how to calculate it is 5 over 42 times 100. The weightage will be okay. So so let's say you have one course learning outcome, which is, for example, to solve problem using major concepts like mediation, and then that is under so your course learning outcome, I'll give you one example. If your course learning outcome is to make sure that the students are able to solve problems using major concepts, so that is for the first and the second topic. Let's say your first topic for your subject is Introduction to Sociocultural Theory and Vygotsky's work. So in order to make sure that the students can solve the problems using major concepts in that particular topic, you plan to have 9 hours for that topic. Okay, so what you do is you can provide them with reading materials on this cultural theory, Vygotsky's work and all that, and then you give them few questions for online discussion, that is for forum. And if you decide that your forum is formative, meaning that for certain period, like for 1 week or after 2 weeks, you comment on their comments, the students' comments in the forum, so that they can improve their comments on forum. So you look at the misconceptions, look at the illogical data, for example, or the invalid reference. So from there you can improve, you give comments, you give constructive feedback so that they can improve their work. Okay, you can also give some sample questions for them to answer after watch a movie, for example, because you want to train them to be able to solve problems using major concepts, right? So from the movie, you ask them, give questions, and from the movie they try to answer the questions given to them, and from there you know that they are able to solve the problem or not. So this is an example of alternative assessment using problem-based assignment. Okay, so lastly, I would like to discuss the barriers that the lecturers or the teachers are facing when implementing alternative assessment. First is, of course, the infrastructure, because we are not a developed country which has a very good internet service providers. Universities also are having problem with the internet service, the system itself, to deliver whatever materials that we have. So the second barriers will be the students' readiness. To make sure that the students are ready, teachers have to have clear instruction given to them, like the pro forma, the assessment document, so given to them, explain to them, especially at the first lecture. Make sure that they know, they understand what they're going to study, and also they understand how are they going to assess. This is sometimes not lecturers are not being particular on this. They don't even explain to the students. When I ask some students, do you have you looked at the pro forma of your course? They don't know about that. And of course, if you don't know, you don't have a look at the pro forma, then of course you don't know how are you going to assess. That comes after that, isn't it? And the barriers is the lecturer's readiness. I know that some of the lecturers are having problems to deliver and also to assess, especially during the pandemic, because we are doing online. But having a positive learning community, you have your friends, your deans, and all the administration staff from the university, we have to help each other so that the lecturers are ready to face these pandemic issues. And then the problem can be time limited. Yes. So lecturers sometimes they don't have enough time to cover all the materials because of the pandemic, because of the online teaching. So you have to plan like how many hours, what are the assignments given, what are the materials given for the teaching and during the learning and teaching and learning strategies, and also what tools are you using. So if the barriers or the constraint is time, then planning is the best one lah, I think. And the last is the critical thinking. So the barriers to implement alternative is when the educationers does not really have good critical thinking or good creative enough to face this. So educationists have to have a positive mind, a healthy body, to accept this and to make sure that or they have to read a lot, get more and more information so that they can be very competent in implementing alternative assessment during the pandemic. Okay, with that, I thank you.